The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for NCEA's webinar, Mindset Matters, Moving the Needle on National Standards and Benchmarks in Catholic Education, presented in partnership with the Pacific Institute. I'm Andrea Kopp, Manager of Educational Resources with NCEA, and I'm happy to host this webinar for you today. Before we begin, please know that all your microphone connections have been muted. If you have questions during today's presentation, please send those through the question box that appears in your GoToWebinar panel. To ask a question, use your mouse to click into the blank box area, type your question using your keyboard, and then click Send. The webinar presentation will last about an hour. You can post your questions or responses at any time throughout the presentation. They will be added to the question queue. Immediately following the webinar, you'll be prompted to complete a brief survey about your webinar experience. I thank you in advance for providing us with this valuable feedback. For those of you who are attending the webinar live, you'll find a copy of the presentation materials and a certificate of attendance in the handout section of your GoToWebinar panel. You can download those at any time. You'll also receive an email tomorrow with those items and instructions on accessing this recorded webinar. Before we get started, let us begin as we do all things in prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. We have with us this afternoon Laurel Menig, Senior Consultant and Master Facilitator for the Pacific Institute, Dr. Melanie Vergis, Superintendent for the Diocese of Baton Rouge, Chris Scafidi, Director of Market Development for the Pacific Institute, Dr. Pamela Bernards, Director of Professional Development for NCEA, and to get us started, we have with us Douglas Solomon, Executive Advisor to the Pacific Institute. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us. This is quite a dream team today, isn't it, Douglas?
Oh, it is, Andrea, and I want to thank you for the introduction, and I want to thank everybody for being here on this webinar. I am honored to serve as an advisor to the Pacific Institute and to assist in their efforts to support the mission of Catholic education across the country. We are grateful to the NCEA for this opportunity and to each of you for joining us. There are so many good friends in the audience today. In education, in business, in the nonprofit sector, and even in government, leaders today are looking closely at igniting fresh thinking, aligning stakeholders behind common goals, and accelerating growth. And a key driver for today's leaders to meet their growth goals is mindset. And to kick off our conversation today on mindset, I'll pass the baton to our friend, Pam Bernards of the NCEA.
Thank you, Douglas. It is certainly my pleasure to be with you this afternoon, and I'd like to welcome all who have registered for today's webinar. As Andrea said, it's quite a dream team, and you are in for a real treat. I had the opportunity to attend an initial presentation here at NCEA by Chris Scafidi, one of our presenters today from the Pacific Institute. I was very impressed by what I heard and readily recognized the transformative power of the information being presented. I then had the privilege of attending and participating in the Pacific Institute training at the Summer Leadership Institute and Advisory Board Retreat in the Diocese of Baton Rouge. That's where I met Superintendent Dr. Melanie Vergis for the first time, and also met for the first time Laurel Menig, who is also from the Pacific Institute, and both of whom you will hear from as a part of today's webinar. My participation in those professional development sessions allowed me to not only experience the training firsthand, but to also observe the beginning of the transformative effect of the information had on the school leaders in the Diocese of Baton Rouge. And this just confirmed my thoughts that I had in the initial presentation. the growth mindset provides a great framework for visioning and continuous school improvement planning. I'm also excited to just let you know that growth mindset is area of focus, one of the areas of focus for our leadership development team here at NCEA as it impacts school leaders, and it's also a topic that our professional development team will consider in terms of impact on teachers and students. So NCEA is proud to have the Pacific Institute as one of our bronze level corporate sponsors, and I look forward to the ongoing relationship and potential benefit for our members. I want to thank you for inviting me to be with you here today, and just let those know out in the field if I can be of assistance to you, please don't hesitate to reach out. And now I would like to introduce the Superintendent of the Diocese of Baton Rouge, Dr. Melanie Burgess.
Thank you, Pam, and thanks to everyone who's attending the webinar today. It has been quite a journey for the Diocese of Baton Rouge Catholic Schools since we first became accredited as a district in 2010. When we worked on our reaccreditation, we realized that we needed to dig deeply. We needed to look at indicators and data, but we also needed to develop a growth mindset and go deep into the soil of our culture. And so one of the wonderful blessings we had was to invite the Pacific Institute to join us last June for our Administrative Leadership Summit, which is an annual event we've had since 2010. We go to the Gulf Coast and we spend 2.5 days working together, principals, assistant principals, aspiring leaders, and we work together as a collaborative learning unit. There's quite a lot of involvement, and we use Title II funding, so all of you out there at schools and dioceses who want to know how we do that, we pool our Title II funding, and that's how we're able to afford such an event. But it is well worth it because it really helps everyone in the diocese to go to new levels, and it creates a culture of, a very deep culture of growth. Our expectations for the Summer Leadership Summit each year is to provide an exceptional opportunity for school leaders to learn, but also to share so that their schools improve. So the focus is all about improvement. It's all about growth. This year, we began reading Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, and I think that the Pacific Institute work that they have done has really helped us to move forward with that. Why did we pick that idea of growth, or that mindset matters? Well, as a result of self-study, as I said, we realized that we wanted to make sure that our culture was changed in a way that propelled us to the next level. We want to focus on continuous improvement, so it's not just an event every 2 to 5 years. We wanted to explore what might help us remove obstacles and embrace growth. And we dug deep, and we continue to till the soil in that effort. So it was a wonderful opportunity for us to work with administrators. But then, at the end of the summer in August, we had the third and final day of the presentation by the Pacific Institute and asked board members from throughout the Diocese of Baton Rouge to join us. At one point, we had well over 100 board members from across the diocese registered. Unfortunately, Mother Nature sent some floodwaters in the meantime, so we ended up with about 75 in attendance, which was still very good, we thought, for that kind of a year. And our board members have done nothing but compliment us on the work that we're doing. I think that they appreciate everything that Pacific Institute helped them understand about schools and about growth, and they've begun to speak with common language about different aspects. Now, the next slide will show you some of the topics that we covered during the Summer Institute. The scotomas, the principals were very happy. They love scotomas. They like to use it in a sentence. They like to to make word art out of it. And they like reticular activating system. You're going to find out more about those during this webinar. But there were quite a few topics that were covered in the different sessions during the 2.5 days, and then again in August during the 1-day follow-up. Never was it boring. Never was it too challenging, but it did stimulate everyone to think differently about how to stretch, how to sustain improvement and how to put on a growth mindset. And so we have a common language and we have a common understanding. So we've been very happy with the product, and I'll be on the webinar all the way through the end, and if you have questions at the end that you would like to ask, kind of, just practical questions, things that, how do you do this or how do you do that, working with 30 principals and their assistant principals and various people, I'll be happy to have input on that. So I think at this time, it's time for Laurel to come and share some more information with you.
Thank you, Dr. Mel. It certainly was a pleasure working with your diocese. Just really enjoyed the engagement of your staff. It was just amazing. So good afternoon, everyone. What I would like to do today is to share a few concepts with you that will demonstrate why the Pacific Institute's education works, and how it helps to change mindsets. But first, let me give you a test. Some of you may have seen this before. If you haven't, this will be a great experience for you. So please look at the next slide very carefully. And what I would like you to do is count the sentence, read the sentence one time to yourself. And here's where you get to count. Read the sentence again and count the number of letter F's that you see in the sentence. And please record the number in the chat box. I'll give you a few moments. So F like in Fred. And Andrea, when you have some recordings there, if you could give me the numbers.
Okay, we're having a few roll in. We have 3, 7, 3, 5, 3, 6, 3, 6, 7, lots of threes, 6, 7, quite a few responses. 2, 3, I think 3 is the prevailing number here.
Okay. All right, thank you. Interesting, so we are all looking at the same thing at the same time, but we have a variance between 2 F's in that sentence and 7 F's. So let's see what happens here. If we go to the next slide, how can this variance occur? Let's count the F's on this slide. Amazing. I'm curious how many of you may have missed the F in the word of. Let me give you a reason why you might have missed some of those F's. Well, first of all, what you're experiencing is a scotoma. A scotoma, as Dr. Mel was talking about, is a Greek word meaning a blind spot. This is when something could be right in front of you and you can't see it, or somebody could be saying something to you and you just don't hear it. So the experience is there, but you are not observing it. So scotomas are caused by the way that we are thinking, and this is where it ties in so nice with Carol Dweck's work on mindset. Because if we have a fixed mindset, we start to perceive information in a certain way. If we have a growth mindset, then the opportunity for more growth is ever more present. Let me show you how scotomas are built. Your mind has a natural filter system. It's called the reticular activating system, and it processes information through this filter system that is significant to you, of value to you, or anything that would be a threat to what you believe to be true. And literally plugs up the screen. If we use that concept of it being a screen, it plugs up the screen to not let things in that are not important to you. So it operates like this screen door. So a screen door lets in the light, of course. It lets in the fresh air, of course. However, the screen is built in such a way that we do not want insects in the home, and so it builds a scotoma to the bugs. And so it literally plugs up that screen so the information is not accessible. It therefore becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy. So let me give you an example. If you expect to have a bad day, what do you think you pay attention to through your filter system? You're probably looking for bad news to validate your belief that it's going to be a bad day. or this could be a bad meeting. And so I'm looking for information, I'm hearing information through my reticular activating system, which is what the technical term is called. So I'm hearing and seeing information that validates what I'm already thinking like. And I could be building a scotoma to anything good. Now, if I expect to have a good day, same thing. I start to see and hear the good news of the day. And I may not build a scotoma to something bad, but if I do see or hear something bad, it's in a whole different context because of all the good that I'm seeing and hearing. So this filter system is a fantastic tool when you know how to activate it properly. Now, what happens with this is that we need to get off the treadmill of being so busy, and I know in my experience of working with Catholic education, everyone is really, really busy. And if you're too busy to sit down at some point to reflect on what are you thinking like, we could be building scotomas to great opportunities. So this filter system will let in information that validates anything that you believe to be true. So in terms of the F card, or the finished file sentence that you were reading, 2 valid reasons why you might build a scotoma to the F in the word of, and this will validate anybody that only saw 2 or 3. If you were taught to read phonetically, then it just shows you're an exceptional reader because you're reading very quickly for probably the essence of the sentence, and you build that scotoma to the F in the word of because when you read the word of, you are not picturing in your mind OF. You are actually picturing OV. And because you are pronouncing the word as of, which sounds like a V, you have built a blind spot to the F in the word of. And so a very natural reason based on past learning, past conditioning, that you would build that scotoma to the F in the word of. So it validates that you're a good reader. So I hope you feel better about that. The other reason you might build a scotoma to the F in the word of is that it's just a small connector word. And so again, if you are thinking it insignificant, it is not coming through your reticular activating system and you just skip right over it. So 2 really valid reasons why you might miss some of the F's in the word of. Okay, so it works according to your beliefs, this reticular activating system. Now, we have lots of liberating beliefs, which would occur in a growth mindset. We also may have limiting beliefs that start to develop more of a fixed mindset. So what I want to do is ask you some questions here, and I'd like you to record your answers in the chat box, and then Andrea will be able to give me some of those examples over our call here. So let's talk a little bit about a limiting belief. So what is a limiting belief? A limiting belief is a belief that could hold you back. And when we think back to the reticular activating system, it starts to bring in information to validate what I'm thinking like. So let's look at some examples. What might be an example that a president or principal could have that would be a limiting belief that could hold him or her back? So if you'd record some answers in the chat box for me, please.
Some of the comments that are coming in are that there is not enough time to take on a new initiative, we don't have enough money, there is no retention problem, people just leave, older teachers can't work with technology, I don't have enough resources, that person thinks they know everything, the staff are too stuck and they don't want to change, and that all teachers are unwilling to do more work.
Okay, all right. Let's take it the next step. What might be some limiting beliefs that a teacher may have? Please record your answers in the chat box.
I'm not supported by my administration. I don't get paid enough to do this. I don't have time to differentiate. The administration is always changing for the sake of change. This is going to take up too much time. Scholastic philosophy has no place in education anymore. It's the fault of the teacher before me. The kids just don't listen, they're not motivated. I'll only teach in my comfort zone. Those are some examples.
Okay, super. Thank you very much. Okay, let's go to the next step. What about for students? What would be some examples of a limiting belief that a student might have?
I'm bad at math. I don't do good on tests. I'm not smart enough. I can't do this. I'll never use this. Theology is not relevant or important. Teachers just want to catch me doing something bad.
Okay, all right. And how about for parents?
This teacher just doesn't like my child. I don't have any time. It's the teacher's job to teach the faith. My child would never do that. I'm bad at math. That's why I don't push my kids to learn math. The school doesn't have as many resources as public schools. I can't keep up with all of these.
Okay. Maybe we'll take the parents through the seminar.
Right. That's another webinar. A lot of things on the theme of that's the teacher's job, or the school's against my child, things of that nature.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks everyone for your great participation. So let me walk you through maybe one or two beliefs of the different categories here, and we'll just see how it reacts with the reticular activating system. So if I'm a leader, and I truly believe there's not enough resources, we don't have the funding, we just can't do anything because there's no funds. More that I reinforce that belief, it kicks in the reticular activating system to actually cause scotomas to opportunities. So I could be missing grants, I could be missing donations, I could be missing out on people that are in the alumni that may be willing to support our school more. I just don't hear it or see it. And so it becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy. So the more that we keep telling ourselves there's no resources, I literally shut down my filter system from actually looking for it. If I'm a teacher and I'm in the classroom and I'm thinking these kids just don't listen, they don't want to learn, and I really sort of put that limiting belief in the classroom, then what I start to pay attention to in the classroom is all the reasons why that belief is valid. And then it affects my performance and the way that I affirm the children in the room. It affects the way that I approach the children. If I think this student just can't learn, then it changes the way that I react with that child, and it could really hold the student back. And so if I'm in the mindset that, the lesson plans that I had 40 years ago are good enough, and that I do not like this new math, or I'm not going to use technology, or it's really going to affect the performance in the classroom. And then that's how in some dioceses that we've been working with, where they've noticed some teachers that are tenured are just stuck. And it goes back to their mindset. If I'm a student and I'm thinking I'm not smart enough, this is too hard, this is too difficult, I can't do math, even as the child is doing their homework, what happens is the reticular activating system starts to build scotomas to information in the verbiage that they're trying to learn, and so it's very difficult for them to get the full essence and the meaning of the lesson that's being delivered. And so the more that they tell themselves, I'm not smart, then when they go to take a test, recall can be very difficult for them, and they struggle. And so then the more the teacher affirms, well, yeah, maybe you're not very smart, and will teach to that belief. So it's very important that teachers are aware of what are the children saying to each other. In high school, how are they holding themselves back, or are they propelling themselves forward for post-secondary education? What is happening? And so the teacher can have a tremendous influence in the classroom just by listening. Now, if I'm a parent and I say, well, my child's never going to be good at math because I wasn't good at math. So they lower their expectation of the child's ability and makes it okay for that child not to be able to do math. So you can see that once we have a mindset that has limiting beliefs, or more of the fixed mindset, it really can hold a whole organization back, because what happens next is it affects our whole thought process. Now, I've worked with the Pacific Institute's information for 25 years and have worked even internationally with it. And it is amazing, because what Pacific Institute has done is taken tough psychological concepts and made it super easy for everyone to understand. So we actually break the mind into three parts: the conscious, the subconscious, and the creative subconscious. Each has a different function. The conscious has four major functions. One is picking up information. And as we are picking up information, we know now, because of the reticular activating system, we are not always seeing or hearing the truth. It's our version of the truth. So my truth might have been 2Fs or 3Fs, and your version might be 7Fs. And we wonder why sometimes we have conflict. Well, we each have a different story. Similar example would be if you have 4 witnesses to a car accident, you can actually get 4 different stories. And that's based on the second step, is where we go into our subconscious and we associate the information with, have I seen anything before? Now, the subconscious is extremely powerful. It stores information, all your past experiences, your emotional experiences, your habits, your attitudes, your beliefs, and your expectations, all stored in your subconscious that drives your self-image. The creative subconscious, its main function is to help you maintain your sanity. And it does that by giving you drive, energy, and creativity to maintain whatever the beliefs are that you have buried in your subconscious. Now, that is extremely significant, because if we do not take some reflection time to think about what we are thinking about, then we are constantly evaluating information based on stored past realities that causes us, with step number 4 on the conscious level, to make decisions. Those decisions then drive your results and your performance level. So if we want performance to improve, what it will require is to update information deliberately into your subconscious so it improves your decision making. Let me give you a simple example. Let's say I have a belief that I'm always late. Maybe as a child I was scolded for being late. It's imprinted now in my subconscious that I'm always late. In fact, you may have someone in your family that you know you need to invite to Thanksgiving dinner an hour and a half prior to their arrival so that they will be on time, because they know they're always late. Now, they don't even verbally say it, it just happens. And here's how it happens. The more they reinforce I'm always late, the creative subconscious then gives them drive, energy, and creativity to maintain that belief. So let's say as an adult now, I'm getting ready for work in the morning. I'm just about to leave the house and go out the door, but I glance at the clock, and it's 8 minutes before I usually leave the house. Well, you can guess what might happen. The creative subconscious is going to give you all kinds of rich ideas of what to do with that 8 minutes. What might be some examples? Put them in your chat box.
Check social media, clean up, do some dishes, make a sandwich, Starbucks. Do some laundry,
You will get
chores.
Oh, great. Thank you. You will get all the creativity that you need to maintain I'm always late. So that belief gets reinforced over and over and over again. Now, if you've read the book Blink, they call this process thin slicing. You're making your decisions so fast you're not even paying attention to it. You're so busy in the doing of it. So this can have great impact on performance individually, personally and professionally for all your staff and faculties. It can have a great impact on student performance. So in all cases, it's really necessary then to have that reflection time to really start to examine what's going on in the subconscious and how can we upgrade our thinking into a growth mindset. So next, Chris is going to walk you through how this can impact organizational results.
Well, thank you very much, Laurel, and it's always great to have you share this information, and I've had the privilege of watching you impact hundreds and hundreds of people. So yeah, well, folks, what I want to talk a little bit about, and I want you to be thinking about, how does this impact the subculture that you oversee, whether you are a superintendent, whether you're a principal or you're a teacher. All of you have the subcultures that you oversee, and so as we go through this information, I want you to be thinking, okay, how do we apply it and make those immediate applications? This particular graphic, I think, does a good job illustrating. It's called a leverage point graphic, and so let me just to start off. Most organizations or subgroups, they have a desire for growth, and so there's a unique desire, and we want to increase growth. And so typically to do that, the leader of that subgroup, they'll develop a strategy, okay? And so it's some new strategy that's going to help us achieve that growth goal. That strategy could be, you know, maybe if you're overseeing a diocese, it's a new enrollment program. If you're overseeing, you know, a school, we want to use this new particular curriculum or new technology. If you're overseeing, you know, a classroom, it's how do I want to break up my class in such a way that's meeting the unique needs of the children I serve. So typically you come up with that strategy, and maybe it's a strategy that's been proven successful in other areas, so you know it's a great strategy. But that strategy, in order for it to work, is really dependent upon the behavior of people to carry it out. So typically when we come up with new strategies, that's where the change word comes in. There's a lot of new behaviors that we want to focus on, and a lot of times you know, I would say most companies that we work with, most educational organizations, they come up with those behaviors, and sometimes the focus is there. It's, okay, so what's the new training that we need to learn to use this new enrollment process? Or what's the training that's going to be required for this new technology or this new instructional style? But that behavior is dependent upon one other thing, and that's what we've been talking about. It's that in order for that behavior to work, it's dependent upon the individual thinking of the people that make up the organization. And that's where, you know, so if you think of this slide as, you know, a teeter-totter or a fulcrum, and where is our greatest leverage point? And the greatest leverage point is on mindset and is on individual thinking. And that's where, you know, Carol Dweck's book does a phenomenal job of reinforcing, you know, these concepts that we've been teaching about for 45 years. Where, I mean, she's just done a super job of illustrating that we need that growth mindset. Again, too often we might focus on the behavior or the strategy. So it's the thinking that really drives the strategy. So I appreciated what Dr. Mel had shared earlier, you know, that as they were going through their accreditation process, they knew what they wanted to do. They had a sense of what their growth goals were, and Dr. Mel and her wisdom and with her leadership team, it's, okay, how do I get the culture and the mindset to match that strategy? And that's a great question for all of you to think about. You know, in your areas of influence, how can I get the culture or the mindset to match the strategy? Laurel, if you go ahead and click off the next, just the next click there, you know, collectively, we would say, you know, a good definition of mindset collectively is culture, you know, and it's the story. I like this definition that I recently heard from a friend. It's the story that we tell ourselves. And so we, you know, that's a good self-reflection question. What is the story that we are telling ourselves as an organization? What's the story that I'm telling myself as an individual leader, as a teacher? And up here on this slide, we're given some good examples. You know, so from an educational perspective, gosh, it's, you know, and maybe the particular teacher is being mandated to implement a new curriculum, and if their mindset is, and let's say that curriculum has been proven in other areas, but if the teachers have a mindset that, boy, it's just impossible for us to implement this new curriculum, as Laura had shared, that limiting belief could build scotomas. If you have a student, and those of you who are teaching and working with students, and you can have the best teaching programs in the world, but if that student believes, I'm not very smart, we know that that belief that they have impacts their motivation, their drive, their energy, their aspirations, their perception. And so again, we could sometimes teach kids until they're blue in the face, but if their thinking is destructive, they're going to be self-sabotaging. And so how can we address that? This last quote is my own personal quote. I taught in a Catholic school in the Boston area, and I remember that I was required to be there on prospective student days. So I had to show up on a Saturday, and it was my job. I taught campus. I was a religion teacher and campus ministry, and I remember, you know, my hesitancy. You know, I just thought to myself, hey, I'm an educator. I'm not a salesperson. You guys are using me as a salesperson. And really, that particular mindset, I mean, it was part of my mission, was to reach out to kids. And yet, because of my beliefs about maybe about selling and about promoting, I was unconsciously sabotaging. So just a question that I would, you know, want to have you think about as you leave this webinar is, one, how does my thinking impact me at a personal level? What are the habits of thought? Do I have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset or a little of both? And that's where that self-reflection in and of itself can be liberating, because then we could address it. Then I want you to ask yourself, how is my thinking impacting me professionally? Do I have professional beliefs that are maybe fixed, that need to be identified and addressed? And lastly, to ask yourself the question and do that self-reflection, how is mindset or thinking impacting the culture I oversee, the group I oversee, whether it's a classroom, whether it's a school, whether it's a diocese? And just know that it's so important. You know, a lot of times we call these soft skills, but those soft skills really have a concrete impact on performance. And so we need to intentionally address them if we want to have your strategy be executed. So, you know, we'll close at this point, and then you know, turn it back over to Douglas and anyone else if they have any questions. We invite you to put your questions in the chat box, and we will do our best to address them.
Okay, we have a few questions that have come in already, and I wager a few more will be coming in as we're chatting. Can you talk a little bit about habits of thought? You mentioned that. What are some basic things that people can do right away to start identifying or breaking some of those habits of thought? Who wants to take that one?
Well, I'll take a first stab, and then maybe Laurel. You know, I think in and of itself, just the notion that we have scotomas, that we do build habits of thought, that in and of itself can be liberating. Because suddenly there's a sense of humility that comes with that, and that allows me to ask those reflection questions. And you know, and I guess the other part I would say is self-reflection. I mean, you know, we rarely get off the treadmill to ask ourselves those questions, but those self-reflections lead to insights, and those insights lead to changes. So, Laura, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Sure, I totally agree with you, Chris. That whole purpose of self-examination is what gives you that insight. And so without self-examination, we don't know where to change or what to change, because most of those beliefs then are buried on the subconscious. And we may not even be aware that we are thinking these thoughts until you get off the treadmill. And I think that's one of the joys of facilitating this material in organizations where people truly get the time to sit down and think, you know, how is my thinking affecting my performance? And so that, you know, we give them tools in the seminar then to help them change that habit of thought. And so that's why it works.
Thank you. We had a related question come in. It says, what are the first steps to change a fixed mindset in a person who's very close to any discussion on growth?
This is Laurel. I think one of the things that we need to be talking about more is, where does the organization want to go? So what is the vision? I was working with a significant organization recently that wanted to have and experience extraordinary growth. And one of the questions as we were going through the seminar that I asked of the leadership team, okay, can people in your organization think like your vision? And if they can't think like the vision, especially at the executive level, then maybe what we need to do is provide them with some coaching, some tools from, you know, this material, so that they are at choice to change their mindset or perhaps move to a different area in the organization so that they are not affecting the decision making to hold the organization back. So I think it's really important that if we start to talk about vision, how do we help people engage in what the vision is? Oftentimes when I'm going into organizations, and I will literally ask, what is your mission and what is your vision and what are your values? And it is very surprising to me how few people would be able to identify it clearly enough that they could embrace it. Any additional thoughts, Chris?
No, Laurel. I think that's good. It covers it.
Thank you. We have a question related to students. How do you help students think positively about themselves?
Chris, you wanted to share that?
Sure. Just very quickly, it's, you know, this exercise with the scotoma is something that I've used with students. It can be a great tool for them to discover, and if it's facilitated properly, that it's just because oftentimes when people do that scotoma exercise and they're seeing 2 and 3 Fs, they misinterpret, and they think that they must not be that smart, and it's really a matter of perception and helping. You know, we love to educate kids on how their own thinking impacts them. What we find is as they discover that, we also see what's called their self-efficacy, that their belief in themselves grows, and then they start to aspire to more. They start to set higher goals, but it's really correctly helping them interpret. So a lot of times if a person's out of their comfort zone, we know that their ability to input information is diminished, their ability to output information is diminished, and if we can help them interpret that correctly, it you know, it can be quite liberating. But it's it does take time. It's being intentional. I would also recommend you know, going to Carol Dweck's book. You know, there's some really practical examples of, you know, helping kids build, you know, she doesn't use this word build, but build a sense of self-efficacy, reward them for efforts. So there are a number of elements, but we find that kids really respond very well to this information.
I think that's right on point. We also talk about in our diocese among our principals the power of yet. I'm not good at math yet, or I can't play the piano well yet. And so that whole idea, and I'm glad you mentioned it, that they learn that they can grow into new strengths and new talent. Very, very important. And it's part of the culture. It's what you need to develop in a growth mindset.
If I could add one other thing, and we could have a whole unit, spend a whole hour talking about the concept of self-talk. Part of what we need to do as leaders and mentors for kids is really helping them to manage self-talk, because we know the research shows that self-talk builds beliefs and then subsequently impacts performance. And so we really need to be mindful of what are kids saying out loud or saying to one another or saying to themselves, and really call them on it and help them, and realize that they're self-sabotaging when they're using, you know, limiting self-talk.
That's great, and it leads into another question that we have in the queue. Chris, you had mentioned mindset being part of soft skills, and this listener would like you to expand upon explaining a little bit more about what soft skills are.
Well, I guess the distinction, and I'd love to hear from others, the distinction is typically when hard skills are specifically, how do I run this computer program? How do I complete this math formula? How do I use this particular tool? Those tend to be more hard, concrete skills. When we're talking about mindsets, what we would break down into habits, attitudes, beliefs, expectations, they're not as concrete, and it's hard for us to get our hands around those. And sometimes our tendency is to because it's not concrete, we don't invest as much time and money into addressing it. And yet the research is very clear. Right? Those of you might Google Cotter and Heskett on culture and performance, but they really they did a great job of measuring adaptable cultures, which I would say have a constructive mindset, and non-adaptive cultures. And they showed that the adaptive cultures outperformed the non-adaptive by 756%. So it was a remarkable landmark study that talked about the importance of, so while they're soft skills, they can have a concrete impact.
That's a great lead into another question related to database decision making. In schools, we need hard data a lot of times to make decisions and allocate funds. How can some of these growth mindset concepts be relatable or trackable using data? And I don't know if maybe Dr. Mel is a better person to address that and how she's done in her diocese, or any of the panelists that want to input on that.
Well, we are all about the data. And so the point is, we look at it this way. This is kind of the analogy. You may have a tree and you see the fruit on the tree, but what are you doing under the ground to have nutrients and to have a rich soil, a rich environment for that fruit to continue to grow? Because if you don't take care of the soil, you may not have many crops, and you may not have the best crop you could have had. You just don't know. And so when you talk about a growth mindset and developing that in schools and in school communities, what you're doing is you're actually fertilizing the soil to be able to have some great data and some great growth in your test results.
And if I could add to that just some concrete examples, we have data that talks about teachers going through this information. One of our programs, 21 Keys to High Performance Teaching and Learning, as they go through the information, even without students going through the curriculum, the teachers teaching differently, they saw a significant increase in both GPA as well as testing results. In other areas, we worked a lot in career schools where they're specifically using these services to address the growth mindset that have a direct impact on student retention and also a direct impact on student enrollment and admissions. So but it really varies depending on the organization and what their goals are. People typically have the skills required to achieve their goals, but it's how do we now give them the mindset behind it to follow through and succeed.
Great.
And I can add one more thing to that. I think that you also need to be aware of how are you perceiving the data. And so if you're looking at it very negatively, then it's going to start reinforcing, looking for more negativity and reasons why the data is that way, versus are you looking at it where here's an opportunity for us to really move forward, and can we think more proactively around the use of this data so that we can move forward to our vision. I think that's very important. What's your mindset when you're reviewing data?
Great point, and these questions are great because one just leads right into the next. This one I think is directed toward Pam, and maybe Dr. Mel wants to chime in as well. How would you suggest helping a faculty grow in their Catholic mindset, growing in understanding, appreciation, and developing confidence in presenting the faith in and out of the classroom? I'm going to throw that one to Pam first, and then anyone else who wants to chime in.
Thanks, Andrea. I think it is provides a perfect framework. You know, when we talk about scotomas, and we also talk about how we actually integrate the faith into everything that we do. There are great opportunities that Catholic school teachers have to integrate the faith into their math, their reading, their language arts, everything that they're doing, and sometimes it's just you know, it's kind of the thing that's in the blind spot that maybe we don't see. So I think this really, this framework provides an opportunity to think about that, to explore that, and develop strategies to actually to implement that into the day-to-day practice.
That's true, Pam. And also, I think sometimes we're guilty of deficit modeling instead of looking for the good and building upon that. So it really has changed the way our principals perceive their work and their communities, and that includes the faith development of the stakeholders at their school.
Great. And then one final question, unless we get more coming in. How can growth mindset transform school culture?
Melanie, what have you seen with your principals? You know, when I was with you in Baton Rouge, I heard some great stories.
Yeah, you saw it. Yeah,
I really did.
What ends up happening with the principals and the teachers and the parents, you know, many of our principals have actually done presentations to their parents, and the parents are reading the mindset book, and they're embracing this idea that that we need to look at the positive and work towards growth and you know, and all the things, and remove the scotoma. So it has really become part of the language and the practice at a lot of the campuses.
Yeah, one of the things is to share when I was able to join everyone for the second retreat that Dr. Mel talked about with the boards, and they had to do some skits, and you know, just to see everyone working together and the ideas that were generated, and just to watch the change. The videos were fantastic. And then one of the other activities they did is they were working on their visioning process and what they wanted it to look like in 2025, and it was great to hear everybody dreaming, you know, if there were no limitations. And when they had to write a press release as though it had already happened, and you know, it was fantastic to see and hear the excitement. And I know Dr. Mel, as superintendent, you had to be pretty fired up about what you were hearing from your school leaders and your advisory board members.
Well, we absolutely were, and we reread that press release at the first principals meeting of the school year, you know, coming in, and it was after the flood, and we reread it, and they really all realized that we can do this. We can dream, and we can work toward that dream instead of making excuses for why things aren't perfect. We can look to making them grow and making them better.
Excellent.
If I could just add to Dr. Mel's words, you know, she used the word "we," and that's real key. What I would say in response to that question in terms of transforming our school culture, when you're producing a growth mindset, at a cultural level, you're building co-accountability, and so it's not just the leader, not just the superintendent, not just the principal. All of us are co-accountable. All of us take ownership of the greater goal, and that's you know, takes a lot of pressure off of the leader. They don't have to do everything on their own, but they've got a whole team of people supporting and helping them out.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, Chris. A lot of our work comes from Dr. Al Bandura on efficacy, and efficacy is, it's my own belief in myself that I can cause, bring about, or make things happen. So we're really providing education for causative power, not just positive thinking. So this is not a rah-rah motivational program at all. By the second session, as was witnessed, there really is a release of energy, and people start to have fun because they're letting go of some of the old beliefs that are really holding them back and really affecting morale in the school building. So when you think of Dr. Albandura's work on efficacy, what we're doing is building collective efficacy, and people understand that with that co-accountability that Chris was talking about, that we can cause better results, that we are not a victim in this at all. We can move forward and grow our schools. And I think that is just such a tremendous relief of pressure from everyone in the organization. And so the energy that exudes once we get to that vision document is just pretty tremendous. So, and it was so much fun being with Dr. Mel's group in Baton Rouge and observing all of that. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we conclude today's webinar, I want to thank all of our panelists for spending their time with us today. And many thanks to our audience for their great questions and participation. Douglas, did you have any closing words for us today before we end?
Well, a very big thank you to you, to Pam, to the NCEA team, and certainly everyone who joined us today. Dr. Mel, we're so grateful to you for your leadership and for your words and for your time. So sincere thanks. We will be in touch with everyone who joined us today. And for those who wish to contact us right away to learn more about our program and how we can partner, on the screen you'll see Chris Scaffidi's contact information. Feel free to reach out to him. And again, sincere thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I invite all of our listeners to visit our website at ncea.org to see listings for upcoming webinars and upcoming professional development activities. As a reminder, I will be sending you this recorded webinar and the presentation materials along with your certificate of attendance via email tomorrow. Thank you all again, and may you enjoy a blessed evening.